Welcome to our College Advantage event here in Tampa, site of the Republican National Convention. I'm Jamie Merisotis, president of the Lumina Foundation, and I want to welcome all of you to this event. Thank you very much for being here today. We're here today to talk about the College Advantage and really the broader issues related to the societal demand for talent. Talent is one of the most important commodities we have in the modern economy, and in fact, the demands for talent are growing more rapidly every day. Those societal demands are increasingly being driven by skills, knowledge, and experiences that can be attained at the post-secondary level, that is, through post-secondary education and training. Now, talent has different dimensions. Certainly, for many years in this country, we have talked about, and we should continue to talk about, the important social dimensions of talent. We know that people with greater talent and skills are more globally aware and competent. We know that they make better ethical decisions, that they participate less in public programs, that they commit fewer crimes, that they have a higher quality of life in general. But we now have increasing evidence that the economic benefits, the economic advantages of post-secondary education are large and they are growing. And those advantages that we'll talk about today in this panel deal with issues related to jobs, whether or not you have one, what the quality of the job is that you hold, how much you earn in terms of your wages, as well as the broader issue of the relationship between educational attainment and job creation. So at Lumina Foundation, we believe that credentials of value are going to be the currency of the modern economy and the currency of the contemporary democracy. By that we mean that the skills and knowledge and experiences that are assigned to, that are represented by credentials, degrees, certificates, and other credentials that are awarded at the post-secondary level will become the primary drivers of our economic and social well-being going forward. It's one of the main reasons why in 2008, Lumina Foundation established what we consider to be an audacious goal for the country, which is that we want 60% of Americans to hold high-quality college degrees, certificates, and other credentials, up from the current level of less than 40%. And for the reasons that we'll talk about today, we think that the demand for those credentials is growing. We're pleased to have an opportunity today to talk about these issues with some of Lumina Foundation's leading partners, and more importantly, some of the leading experts in the field. And we're very happy to have a chance to talk about these issues in terms of increasing attainment. We are doing this event here in Tampa. We will be doing a parallel event next week in Charlotte, site of the Democratic National Convention. And we hope that this makes a sort of broader point, which is that these issues of increasing attainment, educational attainment, are neither a Republican nor a Democratic agenda. They're an American agenda. And that the next president of this country is going to have to grapple with the serious issues of how we get a lot more people into and through college in a world of limited resources. What we'll be doing today is having some dialogue about these issues with our panelists, and then we'll have a chance to hear from some of you in the audience.
Sometimes out of necessity, people have the will and the courage to make a change. So we look in Indiana at Goal 2025 as not an acknowledgement of who we have been, but an acknowledgement of who we need to be in the 21st century, and there's no substitute for higher levels of education.
You know, it's very clear when we look at labor market projections in Colorado that we're simply going to have a demand for more college-educated employees. If we don't have that workforce, we're not going to be able to grow our economy the way that we know we need to. And we need more people who are innovative. We know we need more people who are just well-educated. And we know that with our shifting demographics, rapidly growing Hispanic population, a population we've not well served in higher education, we need to do a better job of reaching that group in particular, or we have no hope of reaching the 2025 goal.
Whether it's Charlotte or rural towns that are losing populations, or whether it's big urban top 20 markets, it doesn't matter. The quest is the same. And that is, they recognize that they will not be able to build their economy without the new inventory. And the new inventory is not space, it's not an industrial park, it's the new inventory is, what do you have in the way of people that can allow my business to grow or to move there? What do you have in the way of appeal for an investor that will look at a place? And so those are the things that are driving most community thought. My favorite story about how important this issue is came from Ralph Schultz in Nashville when I asked him how much of the agenda at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, board meeting, is taken up with discussion about education attainment. And he said, well, in a 90-minute meeting, it'll be about 50 minutes, and that's if it's not on the agenda. It's just consuming, and that's why ACCE got into this. We used to always talk about just things that were related to chamber performance, and now it's about how chambers can get involved in this issue. And so we're playing a bigger and bigger part in trying to help build the capacity for our members to help grow those numbers locally.
To me, it's local. You know, there is a lot of evidence that our national security, as well as our ability to compete effectively in the 21st century knowledge economy, depends on our ability to provide the opportunity for higher education to people. But I like to highlight my community, Miami, which is a place that has become a city in a relatively short time. It's a place where, frankly, it's the third poorest city in America today in terms of median family income. It's a place where 27% of the residents live in poverty. It's a place where only 22% of the population have baccalaureate degrees. And that's, as you know, well below the national average. And what you find is we have an economy that has traditionally depended on two things. Agriculture, not so much anymore, but tourism and the service industry. And most of the jobs that you can find there are low-wage jobs. And the only way that our community, that our economy, will be able to really achieve its full potential, which is plenty, is by being able to provide the kind of jobs that require, the credentials, the skills, and the knowledge to be able for people to gain decent wages. In my community today, with a high school diploma, not to mention the dropouts, all you can hope to do is find a job flipping burgers at the corner, food establishment. And that keeps young people today in the poverty cycle for as long as that's all they're doing. And so we're getting a lot of pressure from the business community, from leaders of industry, to make sure that the city is able to provide the opportunity for higher ed for as many people as possible. And that's the good news. I think the business leadership in Miami understand that a higher education credential is the only way that we're going to move the city from being dependent on low-wage jobs to a city where we can have prosperity based on the kind of jobs that will move people, basically the ticket to middle class. That's what a higher education credential is today. It was not such as something like that for most of the 20th century, but today, there should be no doubt that the ticket to prosperity and middle class status is a higher education credential. And understanding that, and the leadership understanding that, is something that I feel very good about, that being a college president, because it provides us an opportunity to work directly with industry to provide the kind of training skills and knowledge that the industry and business needs locally to be able to prosper.
I'm a living witness that education is the engine of opportunity, not just in terms of jobs, just in terms of the quality of life, voter participation. It has a generational impact. I grew up in the Delta region of Arkansas, family of 11 children. No one in my family had attended college before, but the impact that my having graduated from college has had, not only on my family, but people in that community, but also how that has helped to inform my leadership, such that I'm committed to making sure that people earn a credential that has value in the marketplace. And 2025 is really about completion. It's not just about access. We need access and success. And unless we can tie those two together, at the end of the day, higher education has not fully fulfilled its mission?
Well, I think from a young adult perspective, from a student perspective, it's pretty simply about economic opportunity. There's been a lot of discussion about how recent college graduates are struggling in this economy, and it's absolutely true that graduates are doing worse than they have before. But if you compare that to young people who don't get that degree, it's really night and day. I think the unemployment rate for young college graduates is about 3 times lower than it is for young people who don't have that degree. And that's mirrors what we found all across the country. Young people from all backgrounds, their number one concern is jobs. And getting toward this goal will go a long way to expanding economic opportunity for all different kinds of young people. The aspect that I'm particularly interested in is how we can get young people engaged. So we talk about college completion and attainment. It's not just some academic term, but it's something that means something to young people so that they feel invested in that education and in the kind of policy changes that we need to actually hit the goal.
Well, let's turn to Tony Carnevale. I think it's safe to say that the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce has been influential on the Lumina Foundation with its independent analytic work, focusing on the relationship between education and the workforce, between the important role that talent plays in meeting our job demands as a society. In this report, The College Advantage, we think helps to point out in a unique way how important those skills now are. We now have some evidence that we didn't have before about how critical they are in terms of unemployment and wages and jobs. We'll hear a little bit from Tony about the report and then launch into some conversation. Tony?
I just want to give you a few numbers to trigger some interaction. The numbers are not news to most economists. That is, since about 1983, we've known that the earnings returns, the wages of people who get some kind of education or training beyond high school have been rising relative to the earnings or wages of people with high school or less. And in fact, if we go back to ’73, the last year of the great American post-war boom between 1946 and 1973, in 1973, 70% of Americans had high school or less, 70% of American workers, only 30% had any post-secondary education at all. And among those 70% with high school or less, the vast majority, 2/3 of them, were in the middle class. That is, in modern dollars, they would be making somewhere between $35,000 and $85,000 a year. They were in the middle 4 deciles of 10 decile income distribution. They weren't in the top 3 and they weren't in the bottom 3. What has changed dramatically since then began at about 1983, when increasingly the wages of high school educated workers began to decline, and at the same time the wages of post-secondary educated workers began to rise. That trend has been persistent and powerful to the point now where only slightly less than 40% of Americans who have only a high school degree or who are high school dropouts are still in the middle class, that $35,000 to $85,000 range. The trend is very clear. One of the reasons we did this particular study was because recessions interrupt that narrative. They mess up that story. But what we knew and what we found, that in this recession, as in the past 2, that shift was actually accelerating underneath all the waves of bad news. That the structural shift from an economy where you required high school to be a member of the middle class to an economy where you required some kind of college, post-secondary education or training, that it was building itself relentlessly, largely due to technology change and increased productivity during the recession. So what we looked at was we decided to take a look after the recession ran for a while and after we were in the recovery to look backwards from the beginning of the recession until the current period and see how the stock of jobs looked in America. That is, which kinds of jobs were growing. And what we found, in many respects, validates the narrative that I just talked to you about. And you can see it here in this chart. Follow the green line. That is the number of jobs that were created during the recession, the white part of the chart, and during the recovery, where a good deal more were created for bachelor's and above. Over the period of the recession, we increased net about 183,000 college jobs for people with bachelor's and above. Truthfully, when you look underneath this data, you find that we actually lost jobs for males with college, and there was a steady increase in jobs for females with college, but both in the end, during the recovery, jobs for both shot up. The point here is that when you add up all those jobs from the beginning of the recession, which is December 2007, essentially until a month or two ago, you find that we've actually created 2.2 million jobs for people with bachelor's degrees. And if you look at the red line, those are jobs for people with some college or an AA degree or a post-secondary two-year college certificate. Sometimes people with industry-based certifications. We lost a lot of those jobs in the recession, about 1.7 million of those jobs. The actual number of those jobs declined in the economy by 1.7 million. They began to come back up in the recovery, and at the moment we're essentially breaking even. We've gotten back the 1.7 million jobs for people with two-year degrees, people with certificates. We've essentially back to even at that point. But the more telling line in all of this really is the blue line, and those are jobs for people with high school or less. And if you look there, what you see is a very rapid plummet during the recession. I think the numbers are, we lost 2.6 million jobs. We are by the end of the recession, which is January 2010, when jobs began to grow again, we'd lost about 2.6 million high school jobs for people with high school or less. What is more devastating is that during the recovery, we're continuing to lose those jobs. What that tells you is the economy we knew in 2006, the economy we knew before the Great Recession, is not coming back. What's happening is a lot of the high school or less jobs are gone and not coming back. And to the extent that we keep looking for those jobs, we're looking in the rearview mirror. The jobs that are in front of us will be in larger proportion when this recession is over, hopefully by 2016 or 2017. When this recession is finally over and the recovery is done and we're back on trend, at that point in time it is going to be even more a college economy. A couple other pictures and then I'll move beyond. This essentially shows the same trend since the 90s. The green jobs are BA or graduate degree jobs. They've grown substantially. The red have grown, flattened out, grown again. The red jobs, some college AA jobs are complex. There's a lot going on among those jobs. Some are disappearing, and there are many new jobs there. That's where technology is having its most impact now. And then at the bottom, you see that the high school jobs steadily decline over the period, dropped precipitously during the recession, and those jobs are becoming a smaller and smaller share of the American economy. This is a chart. Let me tell you what it says, because there's a lot of numbers to look at there. The green is growth in college-level jobs, and you can see in industries that grew throughout the recession, that grew in spite of the recession, and are growing in the recovery, like healthcare, the green is predominant. Although we are getting growth in some college jobs, pretty substantially in healthcare, and in business services, the other big winner in this recession, the other stalwart. Even in those cases where jobs have declined, those with large blue lines, you can see those are the high school or less jobs, and those are declining in virtually all industries where jobs decline. Those jobs decline the most, and the some college and high school jobs decline the least. This shows enrollment. There's some good news here. The slight blue line at the bottom is the projected enrollment, the dark blue line with the dark blue buttons on it. That's the actual enrollment. Actual enrollment has exceeded projected in the United States because in the recession, a lot of people ran into college. It was a good place to hide and weather the economic storm. If you come out of if you go to work, if you leave college during a recession, it'll hurt you for the rest of your career. The best thing to do in a recession is wait till it's over. It is very much like a storm because the first job you get will affect the 8th job you get. So you want to come into the labor market when things are robust. That's the good news. This is a little, this one, you can see the dark vertical lines are recessions, and you can see in every recession, the dark blue line shows the big increase in college enrollment. As in most cases, it increases dramatically and then falls dramatically, and that's happening again in this recession. We made a lot of gains in this recession, but the gains are falling off fairly fast. And one suspects that a lot of the completion rate numbers are not going to be good because a lot of kids came into this, or adults as well, moved into the post-secondary sector during the recession, but as jobs become available for a whole host of reasons, like they can't afford to go to college, they're coming back out in the labor market and get whatever they can. One final thing, and this is the best news, I think. The blues are the boys and the reds are the girls. And you can see that the reds are taller than the blues at first. And what you're seeing there is that female participation in post-secondary education has outrun male for a long time, except when you get over into the current years, you see that the male suddenly is outstripping the female participation. During this recession, male participation in higher education went up substantially. It is also a substantial part, I might add, of those who are now leaving higher education. But it did go up substantially. The piece of good news there is there's always been an economy where a boy could make a living, could make $25,000 or $30,000 with a high school education. About 30% of males can get a job at $35,000 a year with a high school degree. There are no such jobs for women, really, unless they're in male construction and manufacturing, other jobs where there are just not a lot of jobs for women. So in the end, and we had a huge overstock of construction jobs in the 90s because of all the funny money that was out there. We were building things we didn't need or couldn't afford. And so males in a lot of ways were set up in the 90s. Access to male jobs, which has always been better than female jobs out of high school, was inflated. And so men in a lot of ways are a good 10 years behind. They're adjusting late. Women have adjusted much more rapidly than they have. But the good news is we're seeing male shifting into post-secondary here. Whether it continues or not, it's just very hard to say.
Because it's a self-fulfilling cycle. If you can convince those students that it's worth it, then they're going to convince their siblings, their family members, and that's critical. The other thing that I've thought is, it would be great for this information to be in the hands of young adults themselves. I mean, some of the stats about how there are jobs coming back, but the jobs that are coming back are for those with the advanced degrees, not necessarily the ones who just have the high school degrees, I think is really valuable information to put in the hands of young people as they're making, there's there's young people, right, who are just about to start college, or young people who are entering their senior year of high school and are making these kinds of decisions that can impact the rest of their life. And often we heard, from you that there wasn't enough counseling to sort of guide them. But information like this, I think, could be tremendously helpful to put into the hands of young people. And the other point about it, I think, is that this sort of drives home the point to me is, in DC sometimes, for example, we get in a fight about Pell Grants. Well, part of the reason that Pell Grants has become more of an issue is because enrollment has spiked. But we shouldn't see that as a bad thing. We should see that as an opportunity. Now we're able to provide education to so many million more young adults.
So, Charlie, how are these issues playing out on campuses? In other words, how is the completion agenda being conveyed, and how are these issues about the economic value playing with students and faculty and others in the institution?
Well, I think, Jamie, around the country we're seeing it, especially here in North Carolina, where boards of governors or regents or members of the legislature are mandating certain retention and graduation rates, okay? And so, but it's interesting, they're mandating those at the same time they're cutting budgets in draconian ways. And so therein lies the contradiction, and I think we need to speak to that issue as a group of citizens as we move around the country. So that's one thing. The second thing, though, I think that in my own institution, what we've sought to do is to elevate the conversation, to say that you can have access and success, and we need to hold people accountable, beginning with the president or the chancellor of the system, okay? And so we can't talk about what someone else should do. We should talk about what we should do. There's a role for faculty members who must learn to teach more effectively, the students that we have, as opposed to teaching content, teach people. There's a difference between teaching content and teaching people. The third piece is to say to students, you have an investment in yourself. You're making this investment in yourself. So all loans, I reject the notion that loans are all bad. Some loans are really good. Loans that you invest in yourself, where you're going to get a higher return and so on and so forth, I argue that that is a good loan, just the same way as a housing loan is a good loan if you can afford to pay it back. And so the way it's playing out then is to say that it is everyone's responsibility, that we need to stop trying to teach students we don't have or wish we had and teach those that we have. Start by focusing on the redesign of gateway courses with high withdrawal, failure, and D rates and that kind of thing. So it's not a one silver bullet kind of notion, but it's a combination of things that we have sought to do here in North Carolina to change that agenda.
Well, I think I can see it at the local level. Most of what he's talking about, we saw a tremendous surge in enrollment during the recession. We're beginning to see that enrollment increase sort of disappearing a little bit. So we're flat in terms of enrollment. I just checked before coming here, as compared to 3-4 years ago. So that is very real, and that means that some students are opting for jobs as opposed to continuing their education, and the impact that's going to have on completion, I think, is something we need to study and really analyze extremely well, because it may have to cause some readjustment in terms of the expectations that we have. That is very real for me.
Well, what strikes me is the sense of urgency to do something about it, and that the path that we've been on in Indiana, and I'm sure in other states as well, to convince our citizens that we need to have higher degrees of education, it certainly affirms that. So what does that mean in terms of what we're doing as policy in Indiana? And we're increasingly looking at ways to pay for what we value in Indiana through performance funding, and looking at tying the way we fund higher education to what we need, which is more completion. It means we need to look at new ways of doing things so that we're not losing people along the way, and that means we need to recognize what the 21st century learner looks like, and that's not necessarily what he or she looked like a couple decades ago, and we need to build systems of higher education that acknowledge those differences. That along with this sense of urgency, it means that we need to make sure that people can complete not only on time, but that they can in fact do that sometimes at an accelerated way. And so we are looking at all kinds of new models in Indiana and other states, and looking at issues that I know others on the panel and the audience are concerned about, in terms of making sure that students have the opportunity to transfer, that they're not getting stuck and they're not accumulating too many credits and not getting a degree for that. And I think it's all wrapped up in this discussion about value attached to college and what does that look like and what does it mean, so that people like the age of Aaron have actually understand that the decisions they've made about college are tied to greater opportunities in their lives.
How do we balance those things out? Because I think the growing anxiety that the public and policymakers have over the rising prices of college, I think, are real. And I think they are issues that we're going to have to confront.
That's a really important question, because we all know, and the data shows, that having a credential does have value, but the question is it worth it when you think about how much you have to invest? And we look at the rising student debt load. We have students coming out, they have that credential, they can even get a job, but can they get a job that pays enough to allow them the opportunity to pay back that debt? That's the real question. That's a function of a lot of things. One is, of course, the rising cost to students as states disinvest and require students to pay a greater portion of the share, or greater share of the total cost. We know that most states aren't putting more money into financial aid. So in Colorado, for example, that's been flat as costs have gone up and enrollment has gone up. But the bigger problem is students who enroll, take on debt, and don't have that credential at all. And they come out worse off than if they had never gone. So we need to make sure that students, as they come in, have a realistic chance to succeed. As Chancellor Nelm said, the important thing is not enrolling students, but graduating students, and then graduating them again with a debt that they have some opportunity to pay back within a reasonable time.
And over time, you can see that all of them are going to require a better skill set, in almost all of them. And so the skill set and expectations that, sometimes I talk to my employers and they that work with us, and they say, well, not everybody has to go to college. And I say, okay, but is 40% enough? Is 40% of the American workforce with some kind of post-secondary degree, is that going to do the job? And they all say, absolutely not. They say, absolutely not. It won't do it. And you can see this. I mean, everybody talks about, jobs going offshore and shipping jobs to other countries and everything, especially in the manufacturing sector in Indiana. You get a lot of conversations about employers talking about all these, and employees talking about all these jobs. But more jobs were lost to technology development and advancements in maturing companies that get more and more efficient than were lost to China. So the next wave of jobs that are going to be created by innovative companies that need new technologies and new studies and new understanding, and that's where the next economies are going to come from and go to. This whole, one of the interesting things about the manufacturing numbers is that there's only been 2 years in like the last 40 in which manufacturing output went down. 2. And during all that time, we were losing 8 million manufacturing workers, but manufacturing output went up. So what does that mean? It means technology, and when you have technology, it means somebody has to know how to run these machines, keep them motivated, keep making innovations to them, making improvements, and working on all the stuff that has to be worked on.
Tony, I wanted to ask you a question about this issue of the attainment challenge. How much of this, from your vantage point, is an adult issue as compared to, Lieutenant Governor mentioned the issue of young people, and yet the data are really about people with jobs and with skills across the continuum. How much of our challenge is an adult issue as compared to an issue of young people, or maybe I'm answering my own question, is it both?
It is both in the sense, especially now, because of the rate of change in the economy, the rate of technology change that we've seen in this recession. In the last 3 recessions, the rate of technology change has accelerated over the period between the recessions, which is remarkable. That is, we're getting our creative destruction more and more from our recessions and less from our growth periods. And the difficulty we face is coming out of this one. More and more economists are saying that full employment in the United States is now 6%, not 4.5% where we got it to a few years ago. But when we come out of this one, there's going to be a huge mismatch. We see some of it already between the skills of experienced workers and the available jobs. We really don't have much of a system for moving those people into jobs. In general, what the numbers say is most of them get a job and within 5 years they're working, but they lose about 30% of their earnings. So we've never really done very well with that in the United States. We've had a couple of major periods in our history, in our very modern history. After 1980-81, manufacturing peaked in 1979 and has been plummeting ever since, virtually all because of productivity improvement, not offshoring. But we've had a displaced worker problem in America for a very long time, and it looks as if coming out of this recession it'll be worse. So and the other problem, as Lumina points out, is if you just focus on young 18 to 24-year-olds, you can't get enough. You can't reach the 60% target. So there are a couple of good reasons to pay some attention to adults.
Paying for what you value. How you fund higher education matters. It sends a signal to the people in your state. It builds on credibility for the product that we're delivering. And for us, what we value is more completion. And we value having more students graduate on time, so it saves them money and saves the state money as well. And so we're looking at all these policy levers that we have. There's not much that we're not trying in Indiana. I mean, the result will be, what actually works at the other end. But we're looking at outcomes, measurable outcomes, metrics around the goal of making sure that more Hoosiers are educated at a higher level.
It's referred to in the state as the Colorado paradox, which is that in Colorado you have an above-average attainment level as a state, but that's driven largely by the fact that the state is a net importer of people with skills, that in fact the education level of native residents of Colorado is below what you need. So what are you doing at a policy level to address that? And what are the consequences for a state like Colorado if you don't increase the educational attainment level of your native citizens?
Well, let me answer the second first, just by saying the consequences would be catastrophic. So what we need to do is, again, make sure more of our young people are getting into and then out of higher education. And so what we need to recognize first is not any one solution. We have to be working with a K-12 system because we have to do a better job of preparing our young people so that when they enroll, they actually have a chance of being successful. So we have had far more of our students now involved in concurrent enrollment, so they have the opportunity to earn college credit while they're still in high school. We know those students are far more likely to enroll in higher ed. We've also made it possible for students to be identified and remediated earlier while they're still in high school, so that when they arrive at a college campus, they've completed the remedial sequence and they can go immediately into college level classes. And then we've also got to really change the mindset of higher education, which traditionally has been sort of a select and sort process. We say only the best and smartest kids go to higher ed, and then even when they arrive there, only the best survive and get out the other end. We need to change that model entirely because we know that for our economies to be successful, we need more kids getting through. So we really do need to change how we approach it and provide the support services and change the attitude of faculty members who got their degrees in a very different time and don't want to change. They say we're not high school teachers, those kids got to figure things out, even though we know at the access institutions I worked at that even if we do something as simple as calling roll those first 2 weeks, has a dramatic impact on whether students finish out the semester and get credit for the courses they've been enrolled in. So we need to do some simple things, but we just need to get everybody to do them consistently.
I think one of the most startling statistics you shared at our first meeting was this notion that if you took every kid graduating from high school and you made every one a college success, you wouldn't hit 60%. You wouldn't hit your goal by 2025. So how do you reach that goal? And I think that the return to work, or return to school from work and return to school while at work is something that we just have to face. States that have gone through major dislocations of workers, I'm from upstate New York, and I got to tell you, in upstate New York, change happens, and it happens fast. And so communities have had to figure out how to get people retrained. for opportunities. But what usually ends up happening is about a quarter of the people who end up being dislocated end up getting trained right there for a job right there. The rest have to find their way. So I think the retraining of people who get dislocated in a new economy kind of thing is something that's important. But again, college education seems to be something that makes it so that there's less displacement. Another thing that's in this study talks about the fact that during the recession and since the recession, more jobs are lost, even in jobs that like previously might have been considered medium skills or low skilled jobs. College people were kept in those jobs. And basically, instead of people thinking in a recession that you might fire somebody who costs you more as a college graduate and hire somebody who costs you less, the opposite happened. People hung on to their college people during the recession.
Charlie, you've, with your president chancellor hat on, you've led 3 different state institutions of higher education. You've been a national leader. What's the role here of public policy? And I'm particularly interested in your view about what federal policy we need to be putting in place, and maybe what should the federal government not be doing?
Sure. First of all, before I respond, let me say this to you. I'm worried about 2 big items. One, the disparate impact of non-completion on certain populations. Okay? We have black, brown people, ethnic minorities, who simply are not, minority males especially, who simply are not getting through that pipeline, enough of them. I'm really concerned about that, and we have to address that. The second piece that I'm really concerned about, and that is the people who say that we have too many educated people are people who are already educated. And somehow it seems to me that we really have to take those people on. The people who say we have too many college-educated people are college-educated people. Okay, the people who already have all of the advantages. Now, to your question. I think that there are a couple of issues. One, the financial aid piece. And you see a convergence of issues here where the federal government says no more summer Pell. State government in North Carolina has said that the maximum number of semesters for which you're eligible for state financial aid, 9 semesters. That's 4.5 years. Okay? So somehow we have to align state policy and federal policy in such a way that we get more bang for the buck, so to speak. Okay? I happen to have had a national defense student loan, and I was able to get loan forgiveness for working in education. I think it's time for us to return or have some kind of loan forgiveness program depending on an area that a person might pursue. I do believe that we ought to tie loans and financial aid to persistence in graduation. I think you got to have an outcome, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying to a student, if you take this financial aid, whether it's a loan, whether it's a grant, we expect you to meet these metrics over some period of time. But I think we have to have a reasonable kind of test in terms of how long that is going to take. And then the final piece is that I think we have to have young people leaving high school better prepared. And right now, the way we fund higher education and secondary education, there isn't that opportunity for greater collaboration between the K-12 system and the post-secondary system, such that we can make better use of the talent pools that we have in terms of faculty members, classroom space, technology, and so on and so forth.
During all this recession, we created 9 different new baccalaureates, basically in conjunction at the request of the business community. Even during the recession, those programs have had 96% placement rate. They have had the starting salaries for those graduates was about $8,000 more than the average beginning salaries for the regular baccalaureate students from the universities. And overall, it was a very successful experiment, and it was all due to the fact that it was created in very close collaboration with business and industry. So these students did not have any problem in finding jobs once they finished. I really feel that, we have a responsibility, and that we cannot continue to be ivory towers, doing the work by ourselves. We need to have that very close collaboration, and I think we're going to see a lot of success out of that, because the students today are really concerned as to whether very expensive tuition, very expensive loans are going to be worth the effort. And I think we need to make sure that when they complete their degrees, not only they're going to get jobs and have the opportunity to start new careers, but that the investment was worth the effort.
So, Aaron, you've thought some about the policy issues, both at the state and the federal level, and I'm interested in your perspective here on what are the right levers we've got to pull at the state policy level, and obviously for the delegates here and a convention audience, what do we need to be thinking about at the federal level?
Sure. Well, there are so many different issues to focus on. Maybe I'll focus on student loans, because I think that's an area that people are very interested in, and I actually think is having quite a bit of impact on students' perceptions about the value of graduating and going through. So you guys probably know most of the stats, over $1 trillion in student loans. Average graduate now has about $25,000 in student loans. Average med school graduate has over $150,000 in student loans. It's really, and it's an issue that we are seeing more and more is affecting not just young people, but older adults as well. And there are a number of, I think, innovative things that are happening. Just to give you a personal example, so for example, there is a program called income-based repayment that the federal government has, which actually lets you pay back your loans based in part on your income. So you make less money, and let's say because the economy is tough, you pay less on your loans. Well, unfortunately, many young people don't know this program exists. The uptake for it is very low. And so there are policy proposals we have, for example, to streamline that, to make it almost the default option that when you graduate, you're going to go into an income-based repayment program. My law school, actually, I have quite a bit of student debt from law school, and we have an LRAP program that actually combines with the federal government has a public interest loan forgiveness program, so they forgive your loans after 10 years. If you go into income-based repayment, you do public interest work, and then after 10 years, your loans are forgiven. Now, not every, many schools don't have loan repayment programs, but I think innovative schools are going to start to look at that. States are starting to do it too. I was just learning about the Opportunity Maine program, which sounds really interesting. And we've been hearing more and more about cities who see, student loan repayment as actually in a way to attract talented young people to come there. We've looked at things like bankruptcy protection. So you can't declare bankruptcy on your student loans, and there's a bill in Congress that'll let you declare bankruptcy at least on your private student loans. So I think there are a number of policies out there, but getting student loans and sort of having a better handle from a policy perspective on student loans, I think will actually give young people and students even more of an incentive to graduate, to stick with it and complete.
Hi, I was just wondering what local institutions could do specifically to increase their attainment rates, like some tangible ideas other than providing statistics and information to them.
So local institutions, you mean what a college or university can do?
Just anyone locally, on the local level, whether it be
community-based organizations.
Community-based organization, what we could do locally to increase our rates.
Well, let's start with one, Eduardo.
Well, we have put in place what I think is an incredible transformation process for the institution in order to accomplish this, and started with having very clear definition of learning outcomes for programs, for specific courses, etc. So the students know exactly when they graduate what are the kind of skills that they're expected to have, the knowledge they're expected to have, and so forth and so on. But beyond that, we're on a phase right now where we're totally redesigning the interaction between students and the institution. We have gone from a time when the philosophy that prevailed was the right to fail, which meant swim or sink. You come to the institution, it's up to you to succeed or not. And the institution did not assume much responsibility for the student, to one that is really based on the right to succeed, which is institution assuming a major part of the responsibility for a student's success. And that entails a tremendous change and transformation in the way we do business and the way we go about serving students. It's an effort to really build a culture of success. and make decisions on a culture of evidence where hopefully, failure is not an option. And that involves, as I said, from the moment the students apply to the moment the students graduate, a complete change in the way that we operate.
The Lumina goal has started to inspire goals in regions and communities. So, and I don't think you can overstate the importance of having this goal out in front of people at local or national level. And that is, in Louisville, where they said 55,000 degrees, they did the math and came up with what they were going to need in different kinds of industries to come up with where they thought they had to be in the next 20 years. And they said 55,000 more degrees have to be available to our community. And so they did a little bit different than the percentage. They came out and said, this is what we're going to need if we're going to be able to compete as a region. And I think that goal sets sort of a sucking sound of everybody's efforts by having that goal, because then somebody who's working somewhere in that pipeline, the return to school, people who've been displaced, or the high school seniors and juniors that you're trying to get into intern programs and stuff, everything starts to funnel toward that goal. And I think we've got some other communities like Spokane and some other communities that are all moving in that direction to try to come up with that, because it gets people to understand that it's a value. In its own right, it's a value. It's going to help us. And so I applaud Lumina, but also recognize these are things that are happening at the local level.
I would just add quickly from our perspective that this issue of local mobilization is something that we're observing in increasing levels. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that in addition to the goal setting, which is a very important first step, it's like setting the GPS in your car before you figure out where you're going to go, right? You got to set the destination. The goal setting, whatever the dimensions are, is very important. But the second part of that, I think, is bringing together the key actors. And we're seeing it play out in different places in different ways. In many cases, you're actually seeing the demand side business leaders driving a lot of it. But you're also seeing the higher education institutions play a role. You're also seeing community-based organizations and increasingly civic leaders, mayors and other leaders playing an important role, like the mayor of San Antonio, the mayor of Memphis, mayors in some of the big cities, Philadelphia. You are seeing increasing engagement of them when historically they viewed their interest in education as being exclusively K-12. Now they recognize the importance of post-secondary skills and credentials, and you're seeing more of that engagement.
This has been a great panel. I agree, obviously, with the goal of increasing college attainment, but it seems to me, I'm with Northeastern University, where we focus on co-op education and having our students go out and work and then come back into the classroom, which is definitely helping them get jobs. But it seems to me that we need to think of a lot more creative, innovative ways to inspire our students to stay in school in a way that will lead to a job. And I'm wondering if the panel can talk a little bit about innovation in higher education that will get to these goals.
Yeah, that's great. I want to turn to Charlie to answer that question. First, we've been talking about serving 21st century students, but we also need a 21st century delivery system and a 21st century system of credentials that actually matches. What do we need to do in higher education, and who else can do this? Is this only the purview of higher education institutions going forward?
Absolutely not. First of all, we need to send all faculty members back to college. I just think the way most of us learned how to teach, those ways are antiquated now. So we got to rethink and come up with a more hybrid kind of approach centered around the student, the learner, as opposed to the content. That's what I meant when I said people who are prepared to teach people as opposed to content. So we really do need to engage in this massive kind of course redesign on the one hand and faculty professional development and retraining in the areas of pedagogy on the other. You got to have those two. Making greater use of technology, because we're dealing with a generation of people. I asked someone yesterday, have they ever bought a postage stamp, a young person in the group? Have you ever purchased a postage stamp? We're dealing with a generation of people who've never purchased a postage stamp, never been to a post office, okay? And so they're so at home with the technology, we have to figure out a way to capture that. So I dare say that this is the sole purview of higher education. I don't believe that it is. I think that we have to get the higher education people coming together, with the technology people, social media, all of these people coming together. And maybe that's something Lumina might want to consider as a kind of project where you do a kind of test kind of thing. The second area where I think we can really have a profound impact is to rethink work-study. There's a lot of meaningful work that can be done within a college or university setting by students engaged in that work with faculty members. And I don't know how to redesign it myself, but I think that's one of the areas around which we need to have some conversation. And we need to get away from paying people $8 an hour when they can go work for a company down the road making $10 or $12 an hour. But we got to rethink the whole thing as opposed to doing a lot of knee-jerking kind of stuff.
Lumina's been involved in a lot of those things. I think many of you know, supporting the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University, the development of something called the Degree Qualifications Profile, which articulates competencies you should have at the associate, bachelor's, and master's degree level. So we get it, but I think the question, Joe, is what's the role of public policy in supporting this innovation? How do we actually leverage change through public policy?
Well, one, I think, is we set very clear expectations for our institutions of higher learning, and we say, you need to do more than simply give someone a diploma. That diploma has to mean something, and it means more if the way you've provided that education has engaged the business community, taught the soft skills that so many employers complain that our graduates lack, and given students the opportunity while they're in school to also be in a workplace and not just working at a fast food place to make a few extra dollars, but working in a business and an industry where they hope to be employed someday, where they're learning what the expectations will be. So I think we need to, we talk a lot about blended learning. We want students to be able to learn online as well as in the classroom, but we also want them to, I think, take that blended learning beyond it and say, we need to blend in the workplace. Sure. How do we give students the opportunity to get some experience that will really help them be better and more productive employees for those employers who are waiting for them?
Aaron, I've got to ask you to take a shot at this question because I think obviously young people are at the forefront of pushing for this innovation.
Sure. Well, first, I totally agree with the interest and the need for reforming work study, and it's not an easy question. You go and talk to students, and many of them like those work study jobs at the at the library, and but that's not to say that we can't. There aren't ways to improve the system so that more of those jobs are leading you to the kind of career that you might have afterwards. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is how do we do a better job of actually enlisting students to go out and looking for those employers in the community who might be interested in having them. So, doing at your school, asking your students, okay, go identify those employers out there who you think you'd like to work for, who your school should have a program with, and the school can work with the students to actually use those students as advocates, to go out and build those relationships. Because, whether the schools are doing it or not, every summer students are going out and they're getting jobs and they're getting internships. And I think the schools actually can sort of combine better with those employers by using students as advocates. The other thing I think is on the internship front, again, whether schools are doing it or not, students are going out there and they're getting internships, and employers are becoming very reliant on these internships. But I think it's a two-way street. You want internships where the employers are actually investing in the student, where ideally they're getting paid for that work, but they're also building skills. And I think there are ways that you can take the existing internship programs and sort of ramp them up to make them more meaningful and more likely to lead to real jobs.
So I'm a tech entrepreneur, and when I graduated college, my teacher told me that I should probably stick to becoming a police officer. And somehow I still have my first company, and now I'm on my second one. But one thing I'm very interested in is I think that community colleges are lacking innovation. And when I look at what New York Mayor Bloomberg has done with Cornell, and what Stanford does with its angel network and its venture capital network, I don't see a reason why we can't do it with the community college network. And as you probably know the stats, minorities are underinvested by VCs, less than like 4% or something to that effect. But I would love to see more kids from community colleges become entrepreneurs, and I think that the infrastructure needs to be built there where they have access to angels. Local CEOs of SMEs can also become angel investors. So now they actually create the jobs and thinking about what job am I going to have. And I think that's the future, at least when I think of it from an entrepreneur, young, innovative perspective.
So Joe, you ran a community college. Community colleges are historically had the role of providing opportunity and access, but now increasingly see themselves as engines of success. How do we make that happen?
Well, I think what's happened at community colleges, and we need to maybe rethink, is that where people came in and learned a trade and got a certificate, now most students are taking academic and transfer courses with the idea that they will go to a four-year institution, and yet far too few do. We also know that community colleges, we've always said, they're great, again, for first generation of minority students. That's where more than 50% of minority students start. That's not the problem. The problem is that too few of them actually finish and do get to enroll in the four-year school that they all start out wanting to go to. To teach them the kind of entrepreneurial skills, though, that Felix is talking about, really does mean we need to think about community college as the place where they are going to get maybe their last academic training and before they enter the workforce. And we need to begin to think about how we connect them with businesses and even potentially investors as they want to start their own businesses. But I can't think of any community college that has courses in entrepreneurship the way many four-year schools and universities do.
My name is Henry Fernandez. I'm an Indiana delegate here at the Democratic Convention. Following up on Dr. Helms's comments and Lieutenant Governor Garcia about the disparities in minority communities, I want to share with you that I'm a former school board member. My school district never would have had a vigorous discourse about the academic achievement of minority students, African Americans and Hispanic students, and even special ed students, et cetera, if it hadn't been for No Child Left Behind and the accountability provisions there. Thanks to the Supreme Court and social and political pressures, higher education is walking on proverbial eggshells when it talks about racial, quotas and everything else, and focusing on race. Can we build the political will, or is it even legal to hold higher ed accountable for increasing the student achievement of low-income and minority, particularly minority students, even if we focus down to minority males, as Mr. Helms has pointed out?
So I want to ask you for a legal opinion, Charlie, but interested in your perspective.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's about serving the needs of all people. And if you consider minorities and underrepresented people as people, then you don't fulfill your mission unless you fully fulfill and serve. I'm really serious about that. I mean, and so I just think that we need to do that. The other thing is, the question is, how are we going to pay? How and when? Because we're going to pay for it through subsistence transfers, prison costs, lost wages, lost opportunities. So we're already paying, okay? And so I just think it's time for college leaders to put this on the agenda, have a good conversation about it, and then move to try to do something about it. We are our own worst enemy in many instances because we don't talk about it as much as we need to. And I've certainly sought to do that in the environment in which I'm a part.
Sure. So thanks for this. This is wonderful, and this has been great. My name is Omar Woodard. I'm a delegate from Pennsylvania, but I'm in a very interesting predicament. I graduated from a college prep program that had a very robust young alumni support program that helped and supported graduates get to and through college. Once I finished college and went on, I became a trustee at the university I graduated from, and we're very concerned about the completion rates for minorities, particularly minority males. I'm a principal at a venture philanthropy firm, and we invest in nonprofits that focus on college access programs and college completion. So my question is, whose job is it? Is it the role of do the public schools and the private schools need the capacity to provide young alumni support through college? Is it the role of nonprofits to really push college access and college completion? Is it the role of higher education to be supporting those folks? Where's the capacity need? Who owns it? Or are there opportunities for partnership across the three?
I'd be interested in having everybody take a quick whack at this question, which is Whose job is it, and where's the capacity going to come from? Mick?
Well, I'm not sure that this is something that is, at this point, it is racially affected and culturally affected by, the numbers are. But I think the solution may be colorblind. It seems to me that some of the lessons that were learned with Harlem Children's Zone are things that should be applied everywhere. I mean, and you mentioned guidance counselors. I mean, the help that is given to a kid who graduates from the Harlem Children's Zone when they get into college is that kind of scholar support and human support that someone can expect coming out of that. And to me, that pretty much is the secret, no matter what. I think that's where you're going to have, one-on-one counseling, accountability, someone calling you. I mean, when they talk about the lack of success, the calls they get to try to help a kid are often that, my car broke down and I had to leave college. That's how simple it gets. And yet that kind of answer might be, the Children's Zone comes up and says, well, here's a carburetor. And then the kid finishes. I mean, it's almost, it's financial and family are the two main reasons that people don't finish. It's not some kind of weird cultural, thing. It's financial and family. Okay, let's all figure out where financial and family can be addressed. And it's not cost of tuition financial. It's the rest of financial.
Right. Aaron?
Well, I think everyone bears some responsibility for it. The group, I'm particularly interested in sort of students owning and having sort of a sense of accountability about graduating and looking at things like student engagement. If you look, the Harlem Children's Zone, and I have known many young people who have been in other sort of similar programs. Those are exceptional programs that often serve very exceptional young people. But the places where we see the biggest completion problem are, community colleges, public universities where there just isn't that support network. And the schools are strapped for resources. But one thing we do see is that those community colleges and places where students are really engaged and where the school invests in students being engaged in terms of being engaged in clubs, and engaged in the politics of the campus in terms of fighting on things like tuition. Those are schools that have better graduation rates. Students feel really invested in that education. And those students, frankly, have the best sense of what it takes to actually graduate because they are the ones who live it. They know that, rent just went up and that's what's causing everyone to have trouble this year, or that remedial math class is really tough. And frankly, there's always going to be a gap. The students are always going to know what's going on better than the administrations are. So you have to invest, I think, in that student engagement, particularly at those kind of community colleges and other places where the graduation is really an issue. I think that's one of the key things.
Great, thank you. Joe?
And answer to the question of who, I would say, all of the above. It is a shared responsibility because there's a shared benefit. We often think that if a student graduates from college, it benefits that individual student and we should all feel good about that. No, it benefits all of us, and that's why we should have a shared responsibility to help that student succeed. If we don't, we all pay a price. And so I think that's why we all need to be invested. It is what lifts up our communities, not just certain communities, not just communities of color, not just low-income communities, but the broader community. I think we need to accept that, again, that this is a social good, not a private good.
Charlie, whose job is it?
It's a shared responsibility with the state, federal, and philanthropic organizations coming together around a public policy agenda to drive it. It's a shared responsibility with federal, state, and philanthropic organizations coming together to put forth a public policy kind of perspective. Part of it is financial aid, financing higher education. Another part of it is, providing for some experimentation. We keep trying the same thing over and over and over again, okay? And we need an opportunity to incubate some ideas and some initiatives and try to implement them.
Very good. We have time for, we're running short on time, maybe one or two more questions. I saw a hand over here somewhere. Yes, sir.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I love hearing all the discussion about post-secondary education, but being a former high school principal and now working in the nonprofit world, unfortunately, in many high schools, post-secondary education still means a 4-year liberal arts degree.
Right.
When we talk about, when we read the Harvard Pathways to Prosperity report and we hear about where the jobs are, what can we do to help our students, our counselors, and our families understand that a post-secondary degree or a credential or a qualification from one of the community colleges is a very viable option? I still think that the community colleges are often seen as a second-tier education.
Yeah. Comments? Yeah.
Certainly, we need to educate students more and families more about the value of those credentials. And, you know, frankly, what we've seen in high schools is we've moved away from post-secondary counselors. I mean, counselors are focused on crisis issues. They're not focused on helping kids figure out what to do next. We also haven't mentioned here yet today proprietary institutions, and we need to be focused on those as well, because they are educating more and more of our young people, particularly first generation and students of color. And when we talk about a credential of value, we need to be very aware that not all credentials have value. Some are very expensive and don't help students at all in the marketplace. So we need to think about how we better inform, and that's going to take an investment, again, in the K-12 system, because parents, if they're not college educated, don't have the ability to really provide the information those students need to make wise decisions.
Can I just make one comment on that? I think that one of the difficulties with going the route of getting somebody after high school prepared for a job is figuring out what that should be. I mean, the turnover and change right now that's occurring, you know, should they just study violin? I mean, there's a real question about what it is they ought to do if that's the goal, as opposed to a general education. So we just have to make sure that if we're giving that kind of counseling, we get close to right within the region. So we can project just a little bit, and Tony's got some good work done about which kinds of industries work, but it's a higher risk with that shorter, concentrated kind of training, it seems to me.
So we are out of time, but I wanted to ask one final question to Tony. So Tony, you're one of the nation's leading labor economists. Your data are pretty compelling. What happens if we don't get to this goal? What are the consequences of our inability to achieve Goal 2025 and actually get the country to that skill level, to that educational attainment level that's reflected in this work?
Well, in purely arithmetic terms, if we achieved the Lumina goal or the President's goal, the two are roughly similar, we would add about $500 billion a year to our GDP. That's pretty clear in the data. And so it affects our ability to produce wealth, which is to say our global competitiveness, because in the end that's the measure of our global competitiveness, our ability to produce wealth. And secondly, the impact on individuals will be opportunities lost. That is, no one ever notices the job they never got. They notice the job they lost. But we've lost, since 1983, we've been increasing our post-secondary production by about 1% per year. The demand in the labor market has been increasing by about 3% a year. As a result of that, the amount that we pay people with post-secondary education over and above high school has almost tripled. It's depending on how you measure it, it's 74% for people with some college or above. It's 84 to 90% for people with bachelor's degrees or above. We're underproducing, and that means that a larger and larger share of Americans, mostly the people with high school or less, which is close to a third of us, simply have no access to the middle class. In very rare circumstances, a small share of them, mostly male, women with high school, really have a difficult time. In the data, they almost don't show up in the sense that any of them have access to the middle class. So we create what is essentially a second-class citizenship in the United States. Because if your job security is low and you have no access to benefits, it's very unlikely that you're going to participate fully in the life of your time as a citizen, as a good parent, as a member of a community, and all the rest of it. So we essentially sequester a share of us who really have no access into the broader society.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you all very much. As delegates, as members of the press and interested parties, we're very grateful for your interest in these issues. I want to say that Lumina Foundation is committed to this work. Our interests in achieving Goal 2025 are singular and focused. This is what we are about as a national foundation. And we hope all of you will take an interest in our efforts to redesign higher education, to mobilize the nation towards the big goal, and to help achieve the successes that we think are necessary for our collective economic and social well-being as a country going forward. So please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you all very much for being here.